In this demonstration, we're going to show you how the tracing capability for business object works. We have a business object called employees. It basically has a list of employees. Some of them belong to departments. And we also have a dummy business object on which we defined two versions of code that updates the salary. Now I'm going to start with the first one. This one accepts a parameter, which is the department name. And then using this parameter, it's going to execute two queries. The first query over here is executed on the department business object. Using the department name, we're going to find the ID of the department. Okay. Once we have this ID, we're going to go over to the employees business object. We're going to query based on this ID, and then we're going to update the salary for each employee in that department ID to add $10 to their salary. So this is one way of doing this. And by the way, notice that over here we're using some things that you shouldn't be doing this way. For example, this way of assigning values into parameters and queries can lead to injections of code. So you should use bind variables instead, which is what we're doing in the second approach. Now, in the second approach, not only are we doing that, we're also using a single query. So you can see we only have one execute query. We still get the same parameter, which is the department name, but we're using this department name over here, okay, as a bind variable. Okay, so we're assigning the value into this bind variable. And then in the query, we're using the accessor from one object to the other to have a single query that actually goes over and using the department name and the relationship between two tables, get the same information and does the same type of update. Now, one thing we might want to do is compare the execution time for those two or the execution plan and how things are happening. So to do that, we're going to use our endpoint testers over here, and we're going to turn on the trace capability over here. So the trace is a new tab that you have here. And at any point of time, you can enable tracing, and you can also enable tracing on either like your development environment, or if you publish your application or stage it, you will also have the stage and publish here. All right, so let's start by running this first update salary that we saw here. I'm going to use the test tab. We're going to run it on dummy object number 1, and we're going to pass over the name, which is going to be marketing. Right, I'm going to copy this because we're going to use it later, and let's send a request. Okay, status 204 means that we were successful. We enabled tracing, so if we'll do a refresh here, we'll actually see the post execution over here. The get, by the way, that you're seeing here is because we did a get for the describe, so you can actually see exactly what we do at every step. Okay, now if we going to test the other endpoint. So let's go back to the other endpoint, which is the new update salary. And we'll run the same test over here. We'll pass in again marketing and send request. We also got 204. If we'll do a refresh, we'll get the new update salary over here. And we can see that they're pretty close in terms of timing. Okay, this is in milliseconds. What we can see next is what actually happened in each one of them. So let's go into the first update salary and we'll click on the details. I'm going to enlarge that area of the screen so you can see what exactly happened. As you can see, you can over here decide what you want to see. You can see everything that we're doing, which includes all the aspects of creating a context and initialing connection to the database and doing the query, and a lot of information is over here on the timing of each one of those. In many cases, you will just want to see either the Groovy or the database or just those two. Let's look at the database, for example, over here. And we can see there are three basic areas over here. There is this one, okay, which executes a query. Then we have another area, again, where we execute a query. Okay, we're actually executing two queries. And then there is this section, okay, which actually does our transaction. So each one of them is going to be a data manipulation. Okay, now all of those are grouped under this area over here, so we can right click on it and look at elapsed span time. we can see that we executed the update command over here with parameters. This was executed 5 times. Okay, so we updated 5 records in a total of 10 milliseconds. Okay, so 5 updates, 10 milliseconds looks pretty good. Let's go back to the spans. And over here we can see the first span, which is again executing the query. This is where we actually use the number 1 ID for the dummy object, and we went over to figure out, hey, is there a row number 1? And there is one, and then we can execute the command on that one. And we executed the function, which is this one. This one again had 2 queries in it. Okay. When we look at the details, again, we're going to see it ordered by the top length first. Okay, so we can see it took us 72 milliseconds to execute this groovy. Okay, inside it we had a 5 milliseconds query that went over the department object. Okay, based on the name, okay, we found out the ID. So this is what we got from this query, and then we did the next query, again 5 milliseconds as well. This one went over the employees and the department in a joint query, a query that basically joins the two over here. And using the ID of the department, went over and fetched the employees that we needed to update. So this is how we built this set of records over here. Okay. Now if we go back to the spans and back over to the other update salary and look at the details here. Okay, we'll see the same concept. So you'll see the updates happening over here with the DML, those 5 records being updated. This is the part where we fetch the the dummy object, and over here we again have 2 queries. So even though in our Groovy code we seem to have 1 query, when you actually look at what happened here, we have a 22 milliseconds of a query that goes over and fetches the departments, okay, over here. And this query is actually being used by this query that runs over, again, the joint of employee and department. You can see again that over here we're doing a subquery. So over here, you can see the subquery, which is used up there. Now, the interesting part for your DBAs is to look at the explain plan for each of those, which gives you an insight into how we're accessing the database and what indexes are used. For example, over here, we can see we did a range index scan on the employee department, and then a unique index scan over here. And this is how we access the 2 tables, and we did a nested loop outer. Again, your DBA could make sense out of those type of things and help you tune your execution of the queries on the database or updates or anything else that needs to be done over here. Note that the actions over here are not just for executing business object logic or business rules. You'll also see things like executing data queries. So for example, if we'll go over to the employees object and look at the data for employees, and we'll define a query. So we'll define a query up here. For example, we can say we're looking for employees where the name starts with, let's say, S. We'll do an uppercase S, and then we'll do a search. This would get us some data over here. If we'll now refresh the view over here and we can sort it by time, we can see the latest fetch that was done over here. Again, we can see how long it took. And if we'll go over to the details, we'll be able to see exactly what query was done over here. So again, we can look at the overall time over here. Look at the top elapsed time. Again, we have a query from department over here, but after that you would see the query from employees over here, where you can see the query on the name using the parameter. And again, over here you can see how we actually access the tables and whether we used indexes to find the information we needed. So this is a little bit about the new tracing capability that you have over here in Visual Builder. You can also export the results over here if you want to keep them later on, and you can delete specific entries or delete all of them if you just click clear here, and we'll clear it, and then you'll be ready to do your next run and your next monitoring.